Right. Okay. So, welcome everybody to this online event of the Edinburgh Trades Union Council COVID committee. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the fourth meeting kind of focusing on higher education issues in Edinburgh. And tonight we are going to sort of focus on issues of disability in higher education. Now, I just want to share with you something that I heard about a week ago by some friends of mine who are parts of different kind of disabled groups. 60% of the victims from COVID, of the people who die, are disabled people. This is, I might not know the kind of exact percentage now, but this is roughly what it is. And of course, the disabled population is not the 60% of the population. Is a lot kind of smaller. I looked around, it's between, in some areas, it appears to be 15%. In some areas, it can be maybe 25, but it's not 60. So this is really tragic. This is really tragic. And we thought of this event as an opportunity to reinforce all the ideas that we had about how important it is to support disabled workers in higher education, but in other sectors as well. And see what we have learned from this pandemic and how we can take things forward and how we can do things better after the pandemic sort of ends, so that although we have lost so many people, at least this becomes a lesson for the future. Now, on top of everything else, today is actually the anniversary of the first lockdown of this pandemic. And Deborah Kayembe, the new rector of the University of Edinburgh, I'm very proud to have here tonight, she reminded me this this morning. I had not even realized that. So Deborah just came here for like a brief period because she's got another commitment later on, to sort of open this meeting with a few thoughts in relation to this particular situation that today is the anniversary of the beginning of the first lockdown. After Deborah does that, we will continue with a number of speakers from different universities in Edinburgh who will update us about issues about disability and kind of what sort of things have happened in this period. And in the second part of the meeting, we have two colleagues from Heriot-Watt University who have some really exciting research here to share, which I thought this is something really hopeful for the future. This is like really inspiring and engaging, that with all this darkness and all this pain and all this tragedy, to see some creative work and the effort of some people who are doing to push these things forward and to focus on that and to think of how to continue in the future with some really good research and some kind of inspiring new innovative projects that can help us to improve our lives together with taking advantage of all these hard lessons that we learned in this pandemic. So I would like to welcome Deborah now to open the meeting.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for your invitation here today. As I said, I am very honored to be with you in this meeting.
Oops. Deborah, we can't see you. You have switched off the camera.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And a year ago, when this pandemic started, I personally didn't have any idea how bad this could go. And more we're getting into the pandemic, more I become numb about the number of people passing. And today is almost a year and we have lost so much all around the world, friends, family, people that we love so much, and people just heard story and breakfast completely. So what is this pandemic as represented to us as a society? For me, it's it's just not about the killing people, but it's about the underprivileged, the lack of access for years and years, people living in health conditions that have not been properly managed because of the color of the skin, because of the ethnicity, because of the social group. So this COVID has shown a still deeply unfair and deeply unequal world in which access to basic rights of health and something that's given by privilege and then by those who have money. And it's so difficult, again, to realize that the current government, the UK government in general, has not made any effort to prioritize human cost, human being needs. It's all about the greed. So what is imperative for us to do right now? I think it's imperative to build a more secure and safe environment in our community. Health security is not an abstract concept. Health security is about fairness and about equity. As it has been mentioned here, disabled people have paid a terrible price in this pandemic, in loneliness and isolation. And then there's so many things that they have been, that made them to be so victims about this pandemic. All I'm trying to share with you today in this somber anniversary is to remember those who have passed and why they have passed. And maybe remember the lessons from it, trying to understand the profound inequality that exists in our society, and each one of us try to work in the effort of building a community cohesion and reject all forms of exclusion. We came from Black people being targeted, and now we are almost in a war against the Asians, and we don't know where this is going to go. The responsibility of all of us here, whatever we work in, whichever field we are working, we need to work for peace, equality, and justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you so much for this powerful message, which we kind of really need to be able to start this session, because really we are talking about inequality here. And like Deborah said, there are various types of inequalities, and some people suffer from a combination of inequalities, which make things a lot more difficult and complicated, and also difficult to understand and untangle in how we can deal with those things. So we will start now with representatives from different universities in Edinburgh, and we will start with Claire Graf, who is the chair of the Standing Committee for Disability, or maybe if I don't say it exactly, Claire, you can remember, say the exact term of this committee, at the University of Edinburgh. Claire is also an officer in different kind of capacities in UCU and also in the Joint Unions Liaison Committee of the University of Edinburgh. She has a lot of involvement with health and safety committees, like kind of all sorts of things. So she has a good, and she's also like a key case worker. So she kind of knows the things, the policy and the stuff like inside out, how people are experiencing all of these things. So we'll start with Claire to share some thoughts on this, and then we'll continue with Eileen, who is going to speak on behalf of two academic institutions. A message on behalf of Napier, who are not here represented, and the Scottish Rural College as well, which is the institution that Eileen works. We then have Sarah McCarthy, who is a postgraduate student in Queen Margaret University. She's also a UCU member. And Sarah will share with us her experience of the problems of disability from the perspective of a postgraduate student. And she will also talk to us a little bit about her work outside the university in the third sector. And we also have Peter Cannell, who is going to tell us a little bit on behalf of the Open University. So all of these introductions will be quite short, so that we can get into the things of the future with our colleagues from Heriot-Watt University. So welcome, Claire.
Right, thank you. You can all hear me, I assume? Yes, cool. My Zoom is sometimes a bit dodgy. Okay, so I am the chair of the Standing Subcommittee for Disabled Members of UCU in Edinburgh. Yeah, I know, it's just, I tried very hard to level it out with the national name of the national equivalent. I'm also UCU's casework coordinator and deputy convener of the joint unions at Edinburgh University, and UCU's lead health and safety rep. Yeah, I know, right? I don't sleep. Someone has charmingly named me the voice of despair of our branch. So I'm afraid that at least the first half of what I'm going to say is not going to be super hopeful. My experience of dealing with disability at the University of Edinburgh is generally, we are very far behind. We do not have a policy for disability or for long-term illness. We have very, very little procedure. We have a bit of guidance, but what can I say? The guidance is so well hidden that I, with all my procedural background, had to look for half an hour to find it. And if it takes me half an hour, then a manager will not sit down in the evening and go, maybe this university has guidance about menopause. I should look for it. So the all over situation, unfortunately, is not particularly brilliant. And the situation is additionally not particularly brilliant because it occasionally happens that people have more than one disability, or that people happen to be disabled and a person of color, or disabled and gay, or disabled and trans, and so on and so forth. And our university especially has absolutely no idea what to do in a situation like that, where it's more than just one of the minorities ticked. So when we went into lockdown with COVID, we encountered a lot of problems, especially for people with disabilities or long-term illnesses, namely that people didn't want to come in. Initially, people were asked to do face-to-face teaching or other customer-facing work, like in the libraries. It took us a while to get the most vulnerable people out of the line of fire, which it shouldn't have. It is still, even at the best of times before lockdown, it was still a struggle to get the right adjustments for people, to get the right desks and the right monitors for people. We had a vacant seat of a disability officer for years. And so everything is taking longer and is more complicated and is more horrible than it should be, which obviously isn't great. But on the bright side, lockdown actually, as horrible as it is, has opened some doors for us. For example, in the past, when we had people who would prefer to work from home, either because they're carers or because they have a disability that makes it hard for them to travel to the workplace every day, or because they, for example, have ADHD and they prefer the quiet of their own office to a large office they share with several people. We always were told that no, work has to be done in the office, and if you're not sitting at your desk, you're not working. And suddenly, everybody is doing it from home, and suddenly, apparently, this problem doesn't exist anymore. and everybody's used to Zoom call now, and those people in the future could work from home. So we are, as joint unions, we input into something called the hybrid working group, which is a working group made out of 4 subcommittees that is now looking at 4 sub-working groups. They are looking at culture change, and they're also looking at working from home. So at the moment, we have an amazing chance to get more flexibility and more of a chance of people working from home several days a week, if that's better for them. We have some little progress in other bits of university. For example, the sustainable travel policy has amazing inclusion options. So, for example, if you're generally meant to take the train for the environment, but if you, for health reasons, you need to fly, you can fly. If you need to stay over, even if it's a place like Glasgow, but otherwise, if you can't sleep there, you can't go to the conference, you will be able to stay over now, even if it is just Glasgow. So I think we're making tiny bits of progress, and COVID has really opened a few doors for us by almost accident. And yeah, I'll of course put my foot in immediately. And yeah, so it isn't great. It's still a bleak and dire situation, but there are tiny sparks of hope this big. Sophia, yeah.
Yep.
You were muted.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Claire. Kind of really clear points that I think they kind of apply more or less to other institutions. Maybe in some other places, there might be a little bit more kind of progressed in terms of having some policies. Maybe, you know, some of the colleagues here might be able to tell us about those things. But even if that's the case, I still think it's a matter of mentality and of perception and how those things are being understood in kind of everyday life, really. So let's have now Eileen Cook to tell us a little bit about the Scottish Rural College, which is the place where she works, but also a short message on behalf of Napier University colleagues who couldn't make it tonight.
I'm going to start with Napier, actually. The message is from Nick, who is the co-convener of the branch and normally comes here. And basically he says, at Edinburgh Napier, we've had to fight tooth and nail for EIS members in their battles against disability discrimination and to ensure colleagues get reasonable adjustments. The employer claims to be an investor in people, but that's a meaningless slogan which doesn't really reflect the experience of the colleagues we support. We are sorry we can't be here today, but we fully support your efforts with regards to this important issue. I probably should have said that both Napier and our institution share something in common, that we're actually members of EIS ULA rather than the more common UCU, which is why we work together quite closely, obviously. But what Nick actually said could just as easily apply to my own institution. It's a battle. And if anything, management take advantage of people who are, if you like, in a weaker position because they need special adjustments or for, you know, for other reasons coming from sort of their circumstances. It's not been helped by the fact that from well before lockdown, the institution was going through what it called a transformation, which was basically management speak for trying to cut the number of staff and make the working conditions worse. And one of their most popular ways of doing this is basically to make it as difficult as possible for people. In fact, some people have actually been told, This happened to a woman who wanted to return to work after long-term sick leave. She was told to return on, to negotiate with human resources, a return to work package, which wouldn't be full-time initially. And she ended up with a higher timetable than she'd had before she was sick. When she complained, she was told, well, you can always resign, and then you can put the reasons for your resignation in your resignation letter, can't you? That's a particularly exceptional case, but there's been lots of examples of that. At the same time as doing this, they're trying to rewrite the whole area of equality policy. We don't have a separate disability policy. It's all an equality policy. But this policy has actually been written without consultation with any of the staff, let alone those staff that are most affected by it. It's basically a management committee. There is meant to be a union rep on it, but he has to go to great length to actually be invited. They do all they can to meet in secret. Presumably, like many policies in recent years, when they've written it, staff will be told it's been written, and that will be regarded as the consultation. So it's a bad time on many levels. It's a bad time because it probably wasn't that brilliant in the first place, with lots of problems on the horizon, and lockdown and everything else concerned with it has just made it easy for management to railroad everything through.
Thanks a lot, Eileen. Yeah, very true that things are not easy, but maybe we can help from the ground. These are some of the things, because the more we kind of become aware as people, both those who are affected, the disabled people, but also the non-disabled people, if we are more aware about all of these things, we can probably make things easier in the future. And we are different groups, and we have different perspectives and different experiences, which is really interesting. So Sarah Mahaffey from Queen Margaret University, who is a postgraduate student and also a UCU member. This is kind of really exciting because we have more and more kind of young colleagues in the trade unions. And also Sarah can speak as a student, but also as a staff to some degree. So it's in this kind of like in-between category, which brings a lot of knowledge to kind of understand this other perspective, in the same way those of us who have precarious contracts, they have other things to sort of share in the way they kind of do their jobs and the problems they experience. So welcome, Sarah. We're very excited to hear what you have to share with us.
Hello. Would you mind if I shared slides? Okay.
No, not at all.
There's only 4, don't worry. It's going to be quick. No. It's just easier.
It's fine. Yeah, if that's easier for you. And it should be fine if we have shared slides before, so that should work.
Okay. Just let me know when it's enabled and I will.
I think Des might need to have to enable. Have you tried to share it and it's not possible yet?
It's not there yet.
Okay, so Des, you might have to make Sarah a co-host for a little while.
Yeah, just done that.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've got so many windows open. That's just so you're right at the bottom. So apologies if this is all kind of obvious or things that have been covered before. I don't know what kind of conversations you've had in the past. So I'm disabled myself. I'm autistic and I have some chronic pain issues as well. so some physical disability issues. So I was kind of writing this with my own experiences in mind, but also as a public sociology student, my cohort, we have kind of been working with other people kind of pushing for change, other people living with poverty and that kind of thing. So I've been trying to balance a few of the things that have come up as social justice issues more generally. So I thought of these three categories. So the kind of issue of stigma, more financial issues, and just the changes that have happened so quickly. I think stigma is quite a significant thing in my work and in my own experience. One of the things that I found quite shocking early on was this notion that it's okay if somebody's died if they had a pre-existing condition, which is, I mean, most people do, you know, even if it's being overweight. So it doesn't really make sense logically, but also the idea that some people are less mournable than others, or that their deaths don't necessarily need to lead to anybody else changing their lives. So I included a kind of random headline at the bottom there. It says, a 21-year-old with no apparent pre-existing health conditions dies after contracting COVID. And obviously that's incredibly sad, but there had been many, many other deaths up to then of people of a similar age who were disabled. And the idea was that that was kind of okay and to be expected in this kind of circumstance, whereas this was more shocking and should lead to more sort of measures like lockdown and things like that. I think also there's this kind of continual reminder for people who cannot wear masks that they're kind of other, and they're kind of harassed and demanded that they should share their reasons and that kind of thing, rather than a more sort of compassionate ways of working around difference. And also the headlines about do not resuscitate orders. So again, the idea of whose lives are worthwhile and whose aren't. And this is the kind of background for disabled people who have been kind of switched on to this stuff and sort of absorbing it throughout this year. And then in terms of finances, something that was quite significant was that there's been a 2-year delay to the disability benefits moving to Scotland. So people have continued to have to claim PIP, which is quite a difficult system to work through. And there's also been massive delays in claims. So certainly in Scotland, the claims have gone up for PIP, probably because people were waiting to be able to claim in the new system and had not been able to. But waiting for that to go through has been quite difficult for people financially. And where other benefits have increased slightly, PIP and ESA have not. So there's not been a kind of comparative boost to people's income, even though things like food prices have gone up. And then a lot of people have had issues within the workplace. So even when they've had accommodations in place due to changes in the workplace, those have been quite difficult to implement. There haven't been kind of risk assessments based on people with disabilities and how they might adjust to new systems and that kind of thing. Everything's been pushed through very quickly without a lot of consultation. Then in terms of the more kind of societal changes in general, things like using public transport, which obviously students and university staff have to do just like anybody else. If you don't drive, you're kind of almost having that outlined and underlined as a kind of huge point of difference. Whereas if people can choose to drive, that's seen as the kind of gold standard for safe travel. So going on a bus, you have to kind of justify it. So things like ending isolation don't seem as justifiable as you know, going to work or something like that. Within universities, it's probably more relevant. Access to support services has been really, really difficult. Just like any other service, you know, that people were in a bit of a panic. They were feeling quite sort of busy, and the service really dipped. Not necessarily just in my own institution. I've worked alongside a lot of people from lots of different places who've also had quite similar delays to accessing services and assessments and things like that. And then with the transition to remote learning, and also for me as a kind of guest lecturer and things like that, I know I have very limited experience of teaching, but I found it difficult to adjust to that. So things like being able to use your individual learning plan. Mine, for example, says I can record lectures. With Zoom or Teams or other forms of meetings like Collaborate, it's not possible for me to have that control. And the sound, doing it with my own little sound recorder, is not good. So that's been something that's quite tricky, but also facilitating training or giving a lecture, I find that the multiple inputs are very, very difficult to adjust to. And then when I'm working to ensure access for students with disabilities, then there's just a lot of kind of different needs being managed that might contrast with each other. It's been a real kind of juggling act, I think, just in my very limited experience. And then I think as well, in terms of kind of wider societal change, is the idea that there's constantly new rules being issued and also kind of enforced quite inconsistently. Certainly for me as an autistic person, and for a lot of autistic people, there's a concern about being criminalized, just kind of having your otherness constantly kind of highlighted. That's led to quite a lot of distress for people. And if we're bringing in hope at the end, if that's the trend, there have been some organisations like there's AAA's in Aberdeen and Number 6 here in Edinburgh who've really been kind of providing like good autistic-led support. There's things like yoga classes happening. Scottish Women's Autism Network has organised counselling for women. So I think the small organisations who've been able to access wee pockets of funding have been using it really creatively. But it does seem a little bit like a drop in the ocean compared to the kind of more institutional change that we might need in order to see reasonable adjustments as a kind of absolute right to enable somebody to participate in the workplace rather than a kind of special treat that you can either accord or not, depending on whim kind of thing. But certainly the responses from third sector have been quite interesting and creative in a lot of ways. That's all I've prepared, so thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Sarah. Thank you, and thank you for sharing with us all of these sort of painful things. I mean, yeah, just to pick one thing from what you said, because myself, I have some kind of medium sensory sensitivity, and I can imagine people with a lot more intense ones. All these distorted sounds that are coming out of these computers, they're like drilling people's heads. Yeah, and people have, both students and staff have to try to do this, and all these different levels. Yeah, one person's microphone is that, and then the other one. This is no one have thought about those things, and we all have to keep going. Yeah, and you don't know to whom to say those things, and kind of where to start with this really. So I just want to pause the flow of presentations now and see if anybody from the audience has any questions or other speakers that they might want to ask questions before we continue with the future. Des has a question.
Yes, I think it's a question directed at Sarah, and because something she said. I'm a Unite official and I'm representing someone who's having a battle with their management. They have a disability, which is a kind of an anxiety disorder, but that is one of the disabilities that exempts you from wearing a mask at work and also exempts you from wearing a mask in shopping and also on buses. But the issue at work is that she's required to wear a mask at work to protect clients, and she can't wear a mask. And the employer is in a real dilemma about, and it's really affecting her about, you know, what they can do in terms of protecting her income. Like we're having a battle because they say she can't be furloughed because she isn't in herself a vulnerable person. In other words, she's not like an immune system challenge or anything like that. And so the employer says she can't be furloughed. And also they say that she can't be medically suspended either because of, they say that's because if you only medically suspended if you're like pregnant or dealing with radioactive type of substances or dangerous chemicals. You can't be medically suspended because you're suffering from a disability like anxiety. And so they put her on sick leave, but a sick leave ends at the end of this month. And then she's going to go on half pay. And our big battle is, you know, she can't wear a face mask to do her work. and so they put her on sick, but as I said, it's running out. So I think there's, for people who have to wear masks at work, and because of disability, they can't wear masks, I think it's a big issue. I was going to ask Sarah if she come across this at a university, and what have they done about it? Because I would assume that in some situations, university lecturers will be university lecturers with disabilities who can't wear masks, and they can't therefore teach, at least face-to-face teaching. And I wondered what happens. That's my question. That's a sort of a long question, but I think it's a real issue.
I think because I'm not a union rep and I haven't done any casework, I can't provide with amazing answers to it. But I do know that it's really difficult because I think there can be quite, with employers, I think quite a sort of rudimentary understanding sometimes of how to interpret the rules. Whereas if there was a sense of supporting the worker and coming from that perspective of how do we make sure this person can do their work, rather than how can they kind of do what we want them to do exactly. It's that lack of creativity, I think, that can be quite frustrating. But I do wonder if anybody else knows more about the kind of actual, if there's been any precedents anywhere else, because I wouldn't know about that. It's not something I've come across in exactly the same scenario myself. I know that I do have one of those exemption cards, but I've only used it once because I'm like, although I do have anxiety and I find it difficult to wear a mask, I also find it difficult to be calling attention to myself. So it's kind of, I just don't go out as much as I should. And I've been delivering training online exclusively, so it hasn't been an issue for me. But I would hope that maybe somebody else here could think about whether that's come up for them, maybe.
Let's see. Kathy, do you have to answer, or is Claire? Okay, so let's see if Claire has something to say to this, and then we'll get to Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to answer those, if possible, from like caseworker's perspective. My first thing as a caseworker would be, if someone is exempt from wearing a mask, and then why the heck should they go on in and teach, right? Because the moment they are not wearing a mask, they're creating a whole health and safety nightmare for everybody. So in our attempts to make the workplace COVID safe, they shouldn't be in. They should be sitting at home and teaching digitally in any case. So if we are in a situation where we need masks, where we really need not face coverings, but actual masks, because it's the essential teaching that still happens for nursing and for veterinary and for surgeons. All those people need to wear proper PPE. And if you can't wear a face covering, you cannot wear that. Therefore, those people wouldn't be in those teaching situations anyway. They would be in all other kinds of teaching. And at the moment, it's still saying, if you can teach from work from home, work from home. The only face-to-face teaching that is allowed is essential teaching. And in those cases, where there is teaching for us at the moment is essential, it's the veterinaries and the nurses and the surgeons. So people who are patient facing in some form. So, and they all have, they all wouldn't be in that field if they couldn't wear the actual respirators. So that means that my first argument always would be that person should not come in at all. They shouldn't be on public transport. They shouldn't be forced to go on public transport, and they shouldn't be coming into the building, because it's not only that we can't protect them, we would create a health and safety risk for the students, which we also can't afford. Therefore, we would, from a health and safety point of view, always say no. Therefore, the person would have to work from home or have to be furloughed. So I don't think that employers have any, at least in universities, have any sensible legal background to ask people to come in and teach face-to-face without face covering.
Thank you, Claire. We'll have Kathy and then Ian, and then after that, we'll just continue with the colleagues from Heriot-Watt. Okay, so that we'll have enough time to discuss that afterwards. Kathy?
Yeah, it isn't really a question, but it just seemed relevant to what Sarah was saying. I've been involved with the STUC in teaching, not teaching, but facilitating some training for health and safety reps from across different unions and different sectors. And one of the things that's, I think, caught a lot of people's attention is that one of the reps, who's in a fairly big workplace, which is essential work, so they've been in work, not everybody, but some of them, they've set up, and this wasn't to do with COVID, it was before that, but they've set up within the union a neurodiversity forum. So it's for workers and union members who work for the company, but have a range of what they're terming neurodiversity issues. And so they've brought people together, they've created a forum, and it's proved really popular just in terms of supporting each other and also raising issues with the employer. So I just thought I'd raise that.
Thank you. That sounds really helpful as a strategy. Kathy, Ian?
Thanks, Sophia. I'll keep this very short. It's incredible nowadays that we have some of the biggest employers in Edinburgh. I work for City Edinburgh Council, but I think in higher education, further education and universities, they probably are one of the biggest employers in Edinburgh, and they've got just as many properties as Edinburgh City Council. I find it really quite disappointing that we're hearing that people can't get a hold of risk assessments, safe working procedures. There's what Sarah was saying there with regards to vulnerable people. It's just appalling. And I think one thing that we've learned in the City Edinburgh Council, we've had this idea kicking about for 2 years now, is that the joint trade unions are going to set up a joint health and safety committee, because some unions are stronger than the others. And I'm wondering if that's something that the universities could do to help each other out in the long run. Whether it's a college or whether it's a uni, you can kind of learn off of each other. And I mean, the situation with your risk assessments and your safe working procedures, that should be an absolute priority. Seeing from a school's perspective in City Edinburgh Council, I have the greatest fear that our highest rate of infection now is in the school establishment rather than the care sector. And one of the colleagues just mentioned there about using public transport. Only last week I sent an email to the senior manager in schools, because the Scottish Government have now reduced the school transportation social distancing from 2 meters to 1. So while we encourage people not to use public transport, we're cramming kids into buses and sending them into schools. Thanks, Sophia.
Thanks a lot, Ian. And it's good to have ideas and suggestions about how to do things differently. Yeah, isn't it? That's the benefit of having these events here in the ETUC, because we bring all the different work experiences or all the different environments, and we also bring different brains apart from different experiences, and we can think of kind of new solutions, and we should be brave enough to try stuff out and not stay with old ways of doing things. Like this COVID experience was unprecedented. We don't know where we are going. We're in the unknown. It's time to try new things. Okay, so let's move now to this other part of the meeting. Claire, is that hand?
Yes, I was wondering if I could, for 30 seconds, real quick, reply to the joint thing. Mm-hmm. If that's okay. I would strongly recommend if your union, your university, if you don't have a joint unions liaison committee, I would strongly encourage you to set one up, because there is the advantage of is bringing our differences together, because you naturally have more health and safety experts in Unison and Unite because you have tradespeople in there and you have people like lab technicians and so on in there who can come with really nice health and safety certificates from their work, like even NIBOSH level 3 and equivalents like that. So that is, they are actual professionals in that, which we don't have. But we have people who know how to do pedagogy really well. So how to educate people and how to make people do the right things because they want to. So we are good at that. So combining those forces together and making sure that the universities can't play divide and conquer with the unions at a place is incredibly helpful. So if you don't have joint unions, I would strongly recommend get a joint unions liaison committee set up.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I think we should continue now with Abraham Bashide. Is that okay, Abraham? Because you've got this focus in your doctoral research on chronic fatigue, which is perhaps a form of invisible disability sometimes, which is kind of another kind of aspect, the kind of invisibility of some of that. And then we will continue with Jen to kind of talk more generally about the wider project. Okay, so welcome, Abraham. I think now Des might need to make Abraham a co-host because he has a PowerPoint.
Let's the presentation slide.
Yeah.
I made him a co-host.
Okay, so you should be able to share it now. Yes, that's it.
Can everyone see that now?
Yep, yep.
Perfect. So I'm Abraham from Areaworks University. I'm a PhD student. And my research is part of a project called the DISC Project, which stands for Disability Inclusive Science Careers. My research is looking into improved disability inclusion for disabled academics. So all the effort is just to make university more inclusive for disabled academics. So I've got like 15 minutes and I'll just talk about a little bit about my research and about chronic fatigue as well in terms of the experience and the impact of COVID and offer some recommendation as well. So this is an overview of my research. I started my research with ethnographic study of the project, the DISC project. And what I've been doing is just taking observation and taking notes of social interactions, of stakeholders involved in the project. And what the ethnography has also done for me is the fact that it has created, give me an opportunity to uncover a gap that needed research attention. And that include hidden impairments, which is hardly visible in academia and even in any organization. So I decided to look into the lived experience of disabled academics living with chronic fatigue, health or impairments. And also I think it's also important to look into how disabled academics are line managed as well. But unfortunately, due to COVID, I couldn't continue the ethnography because that involved observation in the natural setting, in physical space. So I have to adopt what is called ethnography. So that look into observation of, people's interactions and behavior and actions in an online setting for continuity of my evaluation of the project. So I would like to say that, I've seen this for myself. When it comes to disability, especially non-disabled people, majority still think disability is sitting on a chair, and the attention of people to hidden disability is not there. So there's majority of hidden disabilities out there, and then what we've known so far stemmed from about the hidden disability have stemmed from medical model perspective. So the idea of diagnosing and treating disabled people living with hidden impairments. And also the lived experience, which I think is very important, has been hardly researched or looked into in research. So one of the reasons I'm looking into chronic illness or chronic fatigue as symptoms across different kind of chronic conditions is that 1 in 3 disabled people reported living with impairment of fatigue, stamina, or breathing. And also you have 43% reported fatigue as most restricting features in their conditions. So that just shows you, and that's compared to the pain, by the way, which is 27%. That shows you the impact of fatigue in terms of disabling features that constitutes the restriction of activities in people or in chronically ill disabled people. So this graph put into perspective, what is it like to live with chronic fatigue, for example, chronic fatigue syndrome, and things like going to toilets, getting dressed, difficulties in everyday life, in day-to-day activities. And another thing I would like to mention here is the experience of impairment, which is coined as impairment effects by Carol Thomas in a social relational model of understanding disability, which emphasizes on the relational aspect of disability, that constitute disability and sustain disability in our culture. So there's these misconceptions about fatigue in chronic conditions, and I think misconception is even more dangerous than ignorance, because with ignorance, ignorance is useful when you own it, and then when it's transformed to knowledge. But misconception is dangerous because it's a belief that stands in stone. So, and the reason why I say that is because mostly from non-disabled perspective, there's this misunderstanding about fatigue, because we all know how it feels when you're tired, when we're exhausted, and that kind of gets transferred to maybe how fatigue is the fatigue is experienced in disabled people living with chronic conditions or chronic fatigue. So, but in reality, majority think they understand what it is, but in reality they don't. And that, as that quote stated there, that becoming chronically fatigued is like somebody pulls your battery out, and that just put into perspective. So the fatigue that we all experience in everyday life is more like an acute fatigue, so you can recover from it after some rest. But when it comes to fatigue and chronic illness, there's no amount of rest that you can take that could, make you get you recover. So it's a long lasting condition that you have to live with. So in terms of academia, academia is struggling, and then I think in most cases universities management or HR find it difficult to manage the hidden disabilities. And as you can see, there's less than 4% of disabled academics disclose their hidden impairments, and hidden impairment is more like a cost and benefit analysis as well. So what would be the gain for me to disclose my hidden disabilities, or what is it going to cost me? So there's this evaluation that goes in people's mind and disabled people's mind before they think about disclosing, because there's no, the system in place is more reactive as opposed to being proactive for supporting disabled academics. And also, we know that disabled academics living with chronic fatigues, impairments are under research, hardly seen, and their needs are hardly met as well. And like I said, the issues down to lack of knowledge, and that create difficulties in terms of managing disabled academics, especially those living with hidden impairment like chronic fatigue. So this lack of understanding, put together misconceptions, constitutes things like stigma in the lived experience of people living with hidden impairment like chronic fatigue. And the idea of, trivializing, disbelieving, and delegitimizing, the experience is such a huge issue. And if you just think about that, and they just think about the psycho-emotional, aspect of that as well, what that does to the mental health and mental state as well. So it's undeniable to experience, to develop some kind of comorbidity with that or mental health condition with chronic condition as well. And a new research that I came across recently, which is a doctoral research, also shows this avoidance of hidden disabilities. Because disabilities means, when people disclose it, automatically means slowing down, which is rooted down into, the ableism in academia, which is more about discrimination against disabled people in favor of non-disabled people. So as a result, disabled academics have to self-govern themselves and self-navigate the working life without institutional support to come across as good enough and to perform to their best. Like I said earlier, the current practice, for example, in HR, is more reactive as opposed to proactive. And that doesn't allow disabled academics to engage their best abilities. And even there's an opportunity to progress, they hardly even will apply for open positions. So about the impact of COVID, the pandemic has had an impact on everyone, unfortunately. But for chronically ill, disabled people that are chronically ill, on one hand, in a way, I think it's been like a blessing in disguise, because on one hand, if some of them to experience inclusion and participation because everybody is housebound anyway, and I have to work from home. So, but on the other hand as well, disabled people living with chronic conditions that have these anxieties as well of what is going to happen when pandemic, it goes away, or when COVID is away, or after COVID. So there's a notion of anxiety always going to happen, whether the inclusion is going to be incorporated after COVID. And also the similarity between symptoms of COVID and chronic people living with chronic conditions could have made the condition worse as well during the pandemic. And also we have 66% of disabled people living with chronic conditions reporting that their access to care has been disrupted ever since COVID started. So how do we move forward? I think it's important to continue to raise awareness and talk about hidden disability, to bring it into light, make it more visible. And that we can do with compulsory disability training for all staff, to educate ourselves about the unconscious bias and the ignorance that we all need to own, to embrace knowledge and understand other people's perspective or lived experience. And I think the mental support is very key aspect as well, that is very important, because depression, like I said about in terms of comorbidity earlier, is actually the precursor in research that actually mediates risk of completed suicide. And there's a need to heighten sense of community, and we need to become more empathy with each other. I think that's the key word here for me, empathy. I think that's very important, especially given where everything going on. And the pandemic has shown that inclusion is possible, and we can keep on incorporating it even after COVID. And the university just needs to invest more in remote access technology and to support disabled academics and normalize flexible working. And finally, I also say that collaborative work with the university and experts in work and employment, like EDI professionals and the UCU, is also very important. I think somebody mentioned, I think Des mentioned, talks about that earlier. And I think, yeah, thank you. That's me.
Okay, thank you, Abraham. really, really interesting things. And let's continue. I'm not going to take any questions now. We'll get to with Jen as well, because we the time has passed. So welcome, Jen and Remnant. So we are going to hear some information about potential solutions and training for people on these topics. Okay, and also maybe you can say something quick about DISC.
Yes, yeah.
Really quick, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Could I please have the ability to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Wonderful, thank you. Is it going to happen?
You just need to press the slideshow button on the menu above.
Yes, no, I've done that. I've just have a very slow computer and a very poor connection.
Okay. Well, we can see the slide. It will eventually.
It's fine. Oh.
Yeah, that's it.
They've got it. Okay,
yep.
Right. I'm going to give you a very brief outline of what we've been doing as part of DISC in the hope that you can claw back some of your time. So DISC stands for Disability Inclusive Science Careers, and it's a project funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, so essentially taxpayers' money. They've started a larger project called Inclusion Matters, which is about inclusivity and diversity in the academic workforce, particularly in STEM careers, and by that we mean science, technology, engineering and maths. It's been an interesting journey with the funder because they funded 11 projects and I think 9 have already stopped. 10 were about gender and ours was about disability. So it was quite an interesting distribution of how the funding was spent. And the condition on your funding was that you had to deliver something that was had a technological advancement as part of it, not just a standard research project. So we wanted to explore disability inclusive science careers, as in how to make science careers more inclusive and in what ways they are uninclusive or exclusive now. I'm the postdoctoral research associate on the project. And so I think my next slide, I've already done that. I have a terrible habit of doing this. I know what I'm going to say, and then I have it in a different order in my head to what I've written down. So that's the overview of the DISC project. Then I'm going to talk through the data collection that I've done, the early findings, and then I'll talk through all the different outputs that we're putting on, which are hopefully going to be these hopeful interventions for the future, but we'll see. So I'll go back to where I was in launching in both feet first in the DISC project. So this is the hierarchy of our project. The principal investigator is Gareth Pender at the University of Heriot-Watt. He is the Vice Principal of Research and Innovation. He has very arm's length management on the project, and it was important we had someone on the university executive on the team because he had to prove buy-in as part of the condition of accessing the funding. The project's led by Professor Kate Sang, who's an expert in disability inclusion, gender inclusion and organisations. Co-investigators include, but are not limited to, James Richards and Sarah Shinton. So they're both from, they're from Heriot-Watt and the University of Edinburgh, respectively. Then there's me, then there's Abraham, who you just heard speak. And then our research partners are the National Association of Disabled Staff Networks, UCU Scotland, and the University of Edinburgh. So what's interesting about that is I'm a committee member and branch member of our union and a very active trade unionist. But also this is my day job. So there's been some interesting clashes when I've been on strike from a UCU supported role with UCU, my trade union. So it's been a really interesting experience, even just on that basis. And in terms of disability, I'm not massive on disclosure, but I have a long-term acute mental health problem. So have some personal insight, but don't. I have one of those invisible disabilities that no one talks about or talk about, but then ignore. So in terms of our data collection, it's been pretty fascinating. Kate did over 70 interviews with disabled colleagues as part of the pilot of this project. And her findings were pretty damning about the university and higher education as a sector for their employment practices and sort of inherent and structural ableism. And then I came on board, and I had the incredibly fun job of doing a thematic analysis of all Scottish university policies that were directly relating to ill health and disability. And as you can imagine, that was the most dry and unpleasant 3 months worth of reading I think I've ever done in my life. What was interesting about it was that some universities didn't have policies, didn't have access to policies. One Scottish university sent me copied and pasted policies that were 10 years out of date from an English university. And some said, oh, we're moving away from policies and we're doing it on an informal basis. And then they were talking about sick leave and things like that shouldn't be done on an informal basis. So it's a really interesting and eye-opening experience, even if reading the actual documents was pretty painful. And then I conducted 37 interviews with university executives, head of schools, colleges, estate staff, human resources representatives, trade unionists, occupational health, just basically everyone else who makes decisions about disabled people in the workplace. Because I think what's been limited about a lot of what we understand about how disabled employees are managed is we quite rightly platform the voice of disabled colleagues, but then what that doesn't allow us to work out is why people are treating them in a certain way and what informs their decision making, which was why we did the policy review as well, because it's kind of like, well, what paperwork is the manager leaning on or using or not using when they're mistreating their disabled employee. And then lastly, to ensure that our project stayed on track, was appropriate and responding to actual needs in the workforce, we have this fabulous, buoyant, we call it user-led research team because that's what the funder wanted us to call it, but basically a group of engaged colleagues who have an invested interest in access in the workplace, who've given us advice and steered us on what's important and what's not important in terms of our delivery. So early findings, as you might anticipate, are broadly translatable to a lot of the workforce. There's a big problem with immediately limiting disabled people to absence problems, performance problems, a bullying or harassment issue, or an EDI issue, but I'll talk about that in a second. So what that essentially does, if you look at those first three, is it situates disabled people immediately as a problem, like not as a diversity issue, but as a problem. You either will be absent or you will have a limited performance or you'll be bullied. And even if you're the recipient of bullying, bullying is still a problem in the workplace. And the only other mention you get of disabled employees is in the EDI or equality, diversity and inclusion policies, which, like with most organisations and in most sectors, is a tokenistic piece of policy that directly replicates the Equality Act, which is massively critiqued in how it doesn't offer meaningful protections to people in the workplace or in public spaces, particularly disabled people. I won't go into it now, you're probably all very well versed in this, but it's things like the use of the word reasonable. Like what does that mean? Like what's a reasonable workplace adjustment for someone who's recovering from stage 3 cancer in comparison to someone who's got MS compared to someone who's got fibromyalgia? Like there's this kind of non-thing because it's this abstract idea, which also in terms of managers having to use it offers you no material guidance. So what the big problem was, not only did these policies situate disability as negative, what they then did, they gave managers no procedure by which to be inclusive, but only procedures to manage people out of the workforce or manage people into lower salaries or part-time work. On top of that, we found that expertise was outsourced. So if a manager didn't know what to do, they outsourced to occupational health and HR, but then the advice from occupational health wasn't binding. And so you could act on it if you wanted to and you didn't have to. So the reasonable decision made by a manager might be to totally ignore the expertise of their employee who has an impairment and or occupational health with their medical degree. So ignoring both the social, what we call the social model disability and the medical model. So there's kind of a real problem with this disconnect between the people that could help or might want to help or have the expertise to deliver useful and meaningful advice. And the other thing that came up a lot was the difference between disingenuous and genuine disability. And you'll probably be very well versed with this in terms of the application of welfare benefits. So we often hear the kind of skiver, shirker, people on benefits, they're not really poorly, that horrible kind of rhetoric you get largely in the right-wing press relating to whether an illness is genuine. And there's this sort of pervasive stereotype about disabled people that they are somehow conniving to trick people into thinking they're more disabled than they are to access welfare benefits. But given that welfare benefits only put you in poverty income. That's quite an interesting idea. But the same thing was present in the workplace. You get a lot of managers saying, well, I knew that they were genuinely ill, so I didn't mind helping. Or that person, you know, I saw them in the pub and they seemed fine. You know, that kind of questionable judgment making from people who aren't necessarily equipped to make those decisions, and this assumption that someone's going to be dishonest and attempt to play the system rather than trusting their employees want to do their job and would be good at their job given the right support. So they were the early findings. So it was all a bit disappointing and yeah, quite worrying. We thought this would be quite a high level project where we found the real nuances about ableism in the workplace, and actually what we ended up finding was that people just didn't know what disability was, weren't interested in responding to it appropriately, and just sort of tried to shove it onto someone else's desk. So yeah, we had this kind of idea that people had different senses of what disability was. You can refer to this as a conflicting logic. So someone might say, I think the purpose of diversity is, and it might be in direct conflict with what someone else thinks diversity is. And then a worker has to navigate those two different concepts of disability as well as doing their job in an environment that's built for someone who's not disabled. So they have sometimes 2 or 3 times the workload of someone who's not disabled and is working in an environment that was built for their body type. All the measures that were in place for disabled people were reactive, not proactive. So it was never, let's make the workplace suitable, and always, oh my God, we've got this person here, we need to fix something for them. Oh God, they need a ramp, or we need to change all the lights, and it's such a difficulty and it's so expensive. And as I said before, disproportionate responsibility placed on managers who haven't necessarily got this kind of expertise. Quite worrying comments about students being prioritised so much over staff. So at first that might make sense, because obviously the student at the moment in our current system would be considered the consumer and the university the provider, and that's the natural sort of capitalist balance in who you prioritise. But sometimes it meant that students' acts and words of ableism or disablist slurs would be left unchallenged in the university to avoid upsetting the student as the paying customer rather than the lecturer or the member of staff they were engaging with, which it causes a problem in what is actually an institute of learning, where everyone there theoretically is a consenting adult choosing to, you know, like it's not like they're a paternalistic relationship where staff should have their dignity compromised just because someone else is paying to access education. Right, now I'm going to go and try and curve back into my hopeful tone. But what we did find is from disabled academics in STEM, there were loads of creative responses. The way that they'd worked around the inaccessibility of their labs, or they'd managed working with their teams, or they'd written up schedules or reworked their timetables was really interesting. And in addition to that, there was all this technological advancement. So some excellent students learning how to, there was one student who'd increased the speed in which he could talk, because he uses his eye movements to talk using a digital display. And he'd, using his degree, was speeding that whole process up to the point where his speaking voice became as fast and uncontrollable and enthusiastic as mine. I'm aware that I talk way too fast, and he really met me word for word, minute for minute. So there's little things like that where it's like, what it really proves is there's this untapped talent and creative thinking that universities are really missing out on, and other workforces are really missing out on, because there's all these great minds learning already how to adapt and creatively engage with employment. And there's so much we could learn from them, especially now, given the nature of lockdown, the pandemic. Though I, sort of following on from what's been said before, I do find it very difficult. What we do seem to have told people more and more is that disabled people are worthless as part of this pandemic, and we could really do with clawing some of that back and being like, actually, there is so much value in the knowledge and expertise of disabled people, and we should start now to redress that negativity. I've gone on so long. I'm so sorry. I'm flying through.
Yeah, it's Jen, it's fine. But we have another 10 minutes officially until the end of the session. But if you can kind of speed it up slightly so that there's tiny people have any questions. But I mean, it's very, very useful what you're saying. So.
Well, to be honest, sometimes it isn't that useful. So feel free to tell me to be quiet. I just get very excited and I'm like 5 minutes, and 20 minutes later, I seem to have talked for a long time. So I'll quickly talk through our outputs, because these are the exciting bits. So the creation of DISC was all about creating change. Creating change is hard. the entirety of society is disabled. And it's such a strange thing because disability is one of the only protected characteristics in which most people will enter into that protected characteristic during their lifetime involuntarily and not necessarily temporarily. So we all might be disabled. We all will be disabled at some point in our lives. So we wanted to do something to contest that immediately. So we've developed a training package. So it involves some traditional training because a lot of our managers in higher education need the basics of this is the Equality Act, this is the legal minimum, you should do better than this, which is a start. But we also have some really interesting outputs. So one of them is vignettes. And I'll very briefly skim through them in a minute. So we use data from our participants to create these stories, which we then deliver back to the people that were sometimes people that gave the stories, so some managerial interviews, and ask them to sort of explore what's happening in these vignettes and what they think they could do to fix it. And it's been really interesting because sometimes I've used a vignette so it's a short story made from a manager's interview, delivered it back to their manager, and they've gone, I don't know who said this because that's a terrible thing to do. That's terrible management. And I've been sat there thinking, oh, you did that. That's you. This is your story just with location and gender changed. So really interesting insight into whether people recognize their own ableism. So they were really good for that. And then the second output are these virtual reality games, because we're all techie nerds on the project and we're all quite excited about making it a game. So the first one is a job interview, and the participant in the game becomes the chair of the job interview, and the candidate has a mobility impairment. You don't know anything about the impairment because it's irrelevant, only that they didn't attend a particular conference because it's inaccessible. And then one of the interviewers, there's 3 different scenarios, and in one they are outrageously disabled, and in another one they are unintentionally ableist, and in a third one they are very confused about the system by which they support this staff member. And you engage with that person, and you don't know which of those scenarios you're going to get, but you have to respond appropriately to how that's happening, and be supportive of this interviewee. And that's a really interesting thing to do because again, all the script was all written using quotes from our participants. And then the second one is the office, and you wander around with your gaming goggles on and you fix an office because it's incredibly inaccessible, and you see how simple small adjustments are and how they benefit everyone in the office, never just the person that you're assuming that you're going to help. So it's a really good package. I was quite nervous at first. I've never developed training, but actually the traditional training bit's a little bit dry, but you have to do the nuts and bolts of it. But the second 2 bits are really interesting, and we've delivered it to university executives, and it's been really interesting watching them relearn something that they thought they knew. So yeah, these are the basics of it. That's our traditional training. It's why I go beyond the legal minimum, because we shouldn't be assholes is essentially the message, but we try not to say that in the training. And the vignettes, these are just 4 examples. I've got a person called Alex, who is a non-binary person experiencing endometriosis and comorbid with mental health conditions, and we hear about their story. Hazel, who's got chronic fatigue syndrome, so this vignette fits very well into Abraham's work. Michael is a senior STEM manager who manages someone out of the workforce and then can't understand why they're upset with him. And Elizabeth is someone who works in human resources who doesn't see disability, and so we talk about why not seeing something might not be that useful. And then there's the games, which I've already discussed, and they sound really simple, but actually they're really engaging, and you find yourself far more involved than you think you might have been. And so far, they're only in the early stages of trialing, we're getting a lot of interest, and there does seem to be some meaningful change in the departments where we have delivered it. So we're pretty hopeful. Right, sorry about that. That was a quick fire through of the whole thing.
Thanks a lot, Jen. Thanks a lot. That was fascinating. Are there any questions or any thoughts in relation to Abraham's presentation and Jen's? I mean, I guess both presentations tell us how much more we need to do. And these are like some things that I have discussed with Abraham in another context of all these sort of nuances and all this kind of behavioral and this kind of negotiations of things in spaces and in kind of everyday things which are not covered by the policies, and things like the Equality Act being so ineffective. And yet we have some people who are obsessing about how to apply the Equality Act, and it's like, well, the Equality Act never existed. You know, somebody put it together, so it's not eternal. You know, we can kind of critique it and kind of improve it. But what is important is how to get all these experiences from people. And, you know, Abraham was talking a bit about this, isn't it? Like how to get and how to access, and, you know, all this interviewing and all this kind of research to find new ways of understanding how people are experiencing those things. Or on the other hand, the games and the glasses, you know, and the kind of seeing how simple it is to fix certain things, and why people make such fuss about everything, and sort of like real simple things which will make people's life 10 times easier. And that becomes a fuss because people have not even bothered to think about anything. So I can talk for hours about all of those fascinating things, but I just want to see if anybody has any questions or comments about these presentations. No? Claire has a heart there. Okay, Des wants to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, that the last couple of talks. I just want to mention in passing that you know, I was representing someone as a trade union official, but you know, it was a big employer. It was like a public sector employer, and employed thousands of people in Scotland, and you'd think it would know better, but I found a very sharp difference of opinion between ourselves and management was over, funnily enough, the issue of fire safety. I think no one this evening has touched on that yet, but fire safety is a big issue in terms of, I think, people with disabilities. It's all about how you deal with a fire emergency, how you get evacuated, and it affects people who are partially sighted or deaf and who've got mobility problems, etc. And I think, I mean, listen to what people said. I mean, I think there's a very mainstream angle to what people are saying. I don't obviously got time to develop the discussion tonight, but I think I'd really like to be more time to explore what the last two speakers were saying in relation to fire safety, evacuation procedures for people with disabilities. To me, it's a very, very controversial and interesting thing, and I refuse to believe at the moment any public sector employer has fire safety policies which accurately take into account people with disabilities. I'll just throw that in. I don't know if there's time for anyone to say anything, but I think that's a big, big area of debate.
A really, really good idea. I'd really like to, because I mean, I was like thinking about kind of similar things of like how to start applying some of those things, and you know, the games and the vignettes and the stories. We can play those games between us. It's not because maybe they have been designed for the managers, or but that is something that in the trade unions we can have our own local groups who would do different things. I mean, Emma is here, who is one of the equality reps at the Edinburgh College of Art, and we could do all sorts of things with members of the union and with people rather than expecting for the managers. So Jen, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in casework, I regularly advise people to use health and safety as opposed to the Equality Act, because it is so much more procedural. And that, yeah, you know, if I had given myself enough time to talk through properly, I would have talked about the health and safety elements, because they're really important and significant in relation to how a lot of buildings are built, obviously, and how they're structured, and also where people are placed in buildings. And there's a lot to do with dignity tied up in that. I think one of my colleagues, Professor Campbell at Dundee, will often talk about how part of the disabled experience is to have your dignity removed from you. So you get a lot of things like the things that they think are acceptable to happen for example, mobility impairments. Like, if any of you have ever used an EvacuChair before, they are horrendous. It is undignified, uncomfortable, and dangerous, and they're very, very hard to sort of drive and steer. And yet that's the kind of standard. This is how we will evacuate people from a tall university premises. In addition to various temperature, like there's so much, office temperature in relation to menopause, hot flushes post chemotherapy. There's like an endless health and safety angle to this. A lot of what we've done is we've tried not to talk about it directly, because we don't want to reframe disability as another kind of problem to manage around. And we very much want to shape it as everyone should be healthy and safe at work, as per our trade union hats. But yeah, no, in casework all the time, I'm like, you will be more effective, and we will be more effective if we use health and safety legislation rather than the Equality Act, because it won't help us. So yeah, thank you very much for adding that, Des.
Yes, and can we imagine all these things in this kind of COVID situation? Some of them, like with masks or being, all of that, or thinking. I was thinking when Abraham was speaking about the chronic fatigue, how the workers with chronic fatigue right now with this in this online teaching and all, on all the. The order was, I think it was Ian, Claire, and Kathy.
Sophia, just wanted to say, Jen, I actually went through fire safety training just before lockdown, and I know how uncomfortable evac chairs and ski pads are. They're horrendous. I wanted to ask some of the speakers about if they've had any involvement with their occupational health advisors towards disabilities, and how they have found the reports that have come back. Thanks, Sophia.
Claire?
Right. So regarding the fire safety one, I have to say, as a disclosure, former volunteer paramedic, I'm kind of okay-ish with evac chairs existing, because if you ever need one, I think comfortable is the last thing you're going to worry about if you ever really need one. But I have significantly more problems with systematic I don't want to say incompetence, but I was tempted to, when it comes to evacuation plans of disabled students and disabled staff. I had a student once who had a personal evacuation plan. I'm like, cool, I'll read this and I'll know what to do. Yeah, screw that, because the evacuation plan was empty. And that's me knowing exactly whom I have to go to. I embarked into a 3.5-hour journey of calling about almost everyone in estates, disability service, occupational health, student support office, student disability office, actual disability office. And what I discovered was that there is too many cooks involved in making the soup, and the result is horrendous. So 5 different departments all assumed that the other department is in charge of filling in that plan, so nobody did it. So, which means that person who definitely needed carrying out if it came to it, had no evacuation plan and just ended up with the one only person in the department who could carry them out, but by sheer dumb luck. So the point of that is that I strongly believe that we need systems with enough redundancy that one person can drop the ball. So at the moment, a lot of our students who get help and who get the right adjustments and to get the right help only get it because somewhere in this chain of people they're dealing with, somebody is being an A+ human being and is going the extra mile or the extra half marathon for the student or for the staff member. That is great, and I'm glad that those people exist, but we can't rely on that. We need systems that are robust enough that one person that everybody in that person can do work to contract and it still works, and even that everybody doing work to contract and one person completely failing, it still works. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Use health and safety. If you don't have enough health and safety reps, do everything you can to build your capacity of health and safety reps, because health and safety reps make brilliant caseworkers. Automatically, because they can sit in a meeting as a caseworker and go, oh, you don't want to play ball, let me take off the caseworker, let me put on the health and safety rep. Okay, so where's your risk assessment for this nonsense? Does it have a review date? Did you do a quality impact assessment? No? Well, get me those yesterday or we have a problem. So yeah, I think my point generally is, again, get yourself joint unions, and once you have joint unions, get a more robust system in place in some form or way.
Thanks, Claire. We'll get this final comment or question, whatever that is, from Kathy, and we will wrap up because we're getting a lot later than, and maybe Des wants to have some dinner at some point. It's not just me and keeping the call. So Kathy, please.
I'm not sure it's important enough to be the last point, but it's just that in responding to what Claire and others have been saying about health and safety, one of the worries that I'm from Scottish Hazards, which is a health and safety campaign, and one of the worries we've always had in relation to disability is disability being used as a reason, health and safety being used as a reason not to employ people with disabilities, or health and safety being used as a reason not to promote people or to get rid of them at a certain time. And I think even the health and safety executive has produced information about the fact that this is inappropriate. And so I just thought I'd add that, because it can be a real problem.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Okay, I think we should kind of end around here. I would like to thank very much all the wonderful speakers tonight, and I'm so glad that we've managed to record this. Hopefully, when I say the recording, then it will be on the YouTube channel. I just want to say that we've got these meetings happen every week almost. So we can come back to things, yeah, and look at things in more detail. Some of the ideas that we discussed tonight, we can create like separate sessions and discuss them. Also, next week, there is another meeting which sort of deals with disability issues in a different way. So maybe we are hopefully approaching the end of COVID somehow. And then with kind of in a new era, then we will pay a lot more attention to all of those things, and we will look at them in different ways and in kind of all these different levels. So thanks very much, everyone. And I hope to see you soon in the next meeting, or maybe in another one in the future. Okay, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Yeah. Bye.
Thanks for the invitation.